Thank you, Commissioner Melskow. There's a couple ideas that were put forward that I would like to respond to specifically, and then I'll get into my general comments. There was a wine industry representative who suggested that there's a gray area in this ordinance with respect to wineries that made it confusing. And I just want to be very, very clear that the ordinance does not appear to have any gray areas in that regard to me. It very specifically, in more than one place, excludes the wineries from this ordinance and specifically references the winery ordinance as taking precedence for those events. So, you know, once again, I don't know how much more clearly we can state this. This ordinance does not affect events at wineries. They are governed by a wholly separate ordinance and would continue to be governed by that ordinance. The other idea that we heard a couple times is that the impacts associated with nonprofit events and historical properties are essentially the same from an impact standpoint, and hence those activities and those properties should be treated the same. I realize many of you are new to these discussions, but we did specifically discuss that as a commission in earlier hearings, and we came to the conclusion, because of the specific, or not the specific, but because of the general benefit that nonprofit organizations provide to our community as a whole, and because they are essentially exempt from the permitting process now, that we as a commission came to the conclusion that we would continue to extend that deference, if you will, to nonprofit events because of the unique role that they play for the general benefit and welfare of the community. Similarly, the historic structures are almost exclusively dependent on commercial events in order to maintain themselves. They are almost always run by nonprofits themselves, and that was a subject area that we were going to discuss more thoroughly, as Commissioner Wyatt mentioned, in terms of how that should be handled. Should the county sponsor a general plan amendment to rezone those properties? Should we give them an overlay? Should we call them out in the ordinance? That was something to be discussed. So I did just want to get that on the record for folks who may have missed that specific discussion. And then lastly, we've heard repeatedly that we should just simply follow the winery ordinance. We should just make this ordinance like that ordinance so that all of the agricultural growers in the county could essentially follow those same rules. And that seems to make sense. I mean, it seems like a very common sense request. But this is one of those times when institutional knowledge is helpful. And I will say that I was also involved in the public discussion. I was not a planning commissioner at the time, but I was an interested member of the public participating in the public discussions about the wine ordinance when it was drafted. And the reason it was drafted was because the wine industry made a compelling argument, a compelling and successful argument, that they should be held to a different standard with respect to commercial, non-agricultural related events on their properties because wine is a special type of product, agricultural product that's produced here in the county, because it has unique marketing needs, because there are unique aspects to that industry that depend on these kinds of events in order to manufacture, market, and distribute wine, that they should be carved out and treated differently than cattle growers and apple farmers and broccoli growers and those sorts of things. That they needed that ordinance in order to promote their agricultural activities. And that's how the wine ordinance came to be. So where we are now, 10 years down the road, is the rest of the agriculture industry is saying that there's an issue of fairness here, and that they should enjoy the same benefits as the wine industry enjoyed. But I would just underscore that the reason the wine industry is treated differently is because those events are specifically linked to the promotion and sale of their agricultural products. So with that, I just want to conclude by saying that honorable people can have a difference of opinion, and that our democratic system is set up to allow that public space for a discussion of people with differing opinions to take place. And so I really would encourage people to think a little bit harder about these allegations of conflict and bias, because I think what you're encountering here is neither of those. I think what you're encountering here is a robust discussion that represents a variety of perspectives on a very fundamental and complicated land use policy issue. And that's our job. So it may be confusing, it may be frustrating, it may be aggravating, but really what you're experiencing here is this Planning Commission doing its work. So that's my comment. I want to thank you all for coming and participating, and I particularly want to thank the agriculturalists in this room for continuing to grow and produce and make available agricultural products for our local community.
Well said, Commissioner Christie. Okay, so with that, I would like to go ahead and make a motion. I would like to move that this commission continue this item off calendar and send a letter to the board asking them to place this item on their agenda so they can clarify their intent and direction to staff and to the commission as necessary.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Christensen and a second by Commissioner Melskow. Is there any commissioner who would like to speak to the motion? Commissioner White,
well,
I see you
no,
struggling.
I don't.
I think it would be
I
good.
want to and I don't want to. I think we said plenty. I'm going to support this motion with some hesitancy here. I would like us to be able to look farther forward and be able to have the discussion. Here's the hard one. But I think our differences have been clearly stated, and I think some clearer direction from the board, given the amount of time and the confusion here, clear confusion amongst us all, will be helpful.
I'd like to ask the maker of the motion and the second if you would consider maybe adding a little more specificity to the letter in terms of lining out a couple of options that would be helpful for the board to consider for us.
Probably not, just because I want to go have lunch.
Okay. So
Do you have some idea, though?
I mean, I do, you know,
I do.
from what I've gathered, the board has gotten as much public feedback on these issues as we have, if not more. So I have a feeling they kind of know what the issues are, and they probably have a very good idea on what the different options are for them and what would be helpful to us in the future. So I just don't really want to take the time at this point to go over that.
So you're not even interested to hear what my suggestions
No,
might
I'm
be?
sorry to say I'm not.
Just trying to be helpful.
I
Clarity is
appreciate
always
that. Nothing personal this time.
Clear.
I really don't.
as opposed to other times.
Yeah. Other times it could be useful. Not this time.
In that case, then I'll go ahead and call the question, and if the clerk could please call the roll.
Commissioner Christensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Melskow?
Yes.
Commissioner Wyatt?
Yes.
Commissioner White?
Yes.
Chairperson Christie?
Yes. With that, we're going to break for lunch.